Major spoilers for Houseki no Kuni, or Land of the Lustrous if you're not a helpless weeb. But regardless of what you call it, it's a visually stunning manga that lives on symbolism and interpretation. So nearly everything in this video is just my interpretation over my 2 read-throughs of the manga. Unfortunately for me, it also uses a lot of Buddhist imagery and symbolism specifically. And while I'm familiar with some aspects as a longtime fan of the medium, I'm by no means an expert and am not equipped to fully discuss it. So if there's anything I'm missing in this video, or if you know any cool details that would deepen my appreciation of the work, I'd love to hear from you in a comment. But even without an understanding of the inspirations, what is obvious is the main subject matters, not the least of which is change and finding peace with oneself. And the protagonist, Phos, is a living Theseus, and one named after a gem that symbolizes overcoming hardships and healing. It's rare to see a single character change so much in as many increments as Phos does. And every major development ends up tied to their physical being in some way, accompanied by slight changes in their design. And I'd like to go through each stage in Phos's life, and what I think the story tells us through the physical evolution of Phos, and how those struggles and ideas permeate the rest of the manga. After reading Land of the Lustrous, I had the impression that it was a story about the burdens inherent to being human, the pains that come from existing in both a mind and a body. And hopefully by the end of the video you'll understand why I thought that was, and how it's a valid interpretation of this amazing metaphor piece. Phos is introduced as a child, largely indistinguishable from the rest of the gems by design. All are immortal beings who can continue to live on even after shattering into hundreds of pieces, so long as the pieces are assembled and put back together again, back to the one ideal form they were born with. But of the gems, Phos is the only one treated like a child, due to their fragility and ineptitude. Phos is defined by immaturity and helplessness, which is how we all begin our lives. Everyone already has an assigned role in the community apart from Phos, and their brand of immortality doesn't allow much room for change. They do their duties, fight Lunarians occasionally, and don't need to worry about the world outside of their island. In a desperate attempt to give Phos a job, Sensei Kongo assigns them the task of recording history and discovering something new. And it's this well-intentioned search for something new that ignites the events that will end the whole world. The beginning of the manga introduces a handful of gems yearning for change. Phos is discontent with their weakness and how they're treated by others. Cinnabar hates solitude, but their poison makes them a danger to those around them. Diamond is sturdier than most gems, but they too hate how weak they are compared to Bort. Their inability to change is reflected by their immortal solid compositions, resembling objects more than living, breathing beings. And a consistent trend is that the higher their durability, the more stubborn a character is, and by extension the more unwilling they are to change. The prime example is the ever-reliable Bort, and the immovable machine that is Sensei Kongo. That's why it's Phos's fragility and lack of strength that makes them the one to change so much and so rapidly. Every time Phos's fragile body loses a piece, some stronger foreign element is used as a surrogate. Most of us can't relate to losing our head, but we've all gotten sick and sooner or later we're all gonna have back pain. Maybe some of us aren't comfortable with our bodies, too fat or too ugly or too weak. We can all relate to not feeling satisfied with our physical forms and wanting to be better. And throughout the manga, Phos usually feels obligated to try and make themselves better. So the first big change we see is Phos turning into a slug. Now this is just a fake out, but this metamorphosis makes Diamond contemplate their situation. Can someone finally stop comparing themselves to others after they change for the better? And as the manga later tells, such a change has no bearing on whether or not one continues to feel inadequate. Later it's outright stated that comparison is the starting point of inequality. It's a breeding ground for envy and pride. And that's something Daya's character will struggle with until the very end. The actual first change Phos lives through is getting assimilated to the slug shell. When reconstructed, Phos can hear the slug's voices, unlocking their first unique skill. However, the slug uses its voice to deceive Phos, and Phos's next big change represents a loss of innocence. After knowing betrayal and losing a large part of themselves for the first time, Phos was forced to confront their naivete. Ventricosis leaves her brother's shell out of pity for Phos, and they eventually become her new legs. And later scenes show Phos looking or holding their new legs when talking about their former optimism. It's a scar, but one with benefits. The new legs become the first tool to help Phos become more capable. They're figuratively standing on their own 2 legs now. And these legs allow Phos to participate in patrols, and that involves waking up early and sitting through boring briefings. In other words, it's Phos's first real job. The beginning of adulthood. And unlike the other gems, Phos is not just bone but flesh as well. As we learn, the 3 races that represent the 3 parts of humanity, flesh, bone, and spirit, can join back up again to become human once more, and Phos has taken the first step of that prophecy. Volume 3 is when the seasons start contributing to the motif of change. The coming of winter comes with the realization of cycles. In this fantasy setting of unchanging characters who both desire and fear change, the seasons still cycle around them all the same, and winter would give Phos more responsibilities, in addition to the guilt that comes with failing to uphold them. Antark knew solitude better than most gems, but they were content as long as Sensei Kongo was there. Their sense of duty influenced Phos for the better, but when Antark is taken in front of Phos, the resulting guilt forced them to fulfill their duties in Antark's stead. And that lonely winter with no other gems to lean on sculpted Phos into a more respectable gem. Phos cut their messy, childlike hair for a more practical look. Their demeanor took a more serious tone too, obviously mimicking Antark. And most importantly, the arms they cut off in a desperate attempt to get stronger was replaced by a malleable lump of gold and platinum. In addition to legs to stand on, they now had strong arms to fight with. But these arms are also how Phos would best mimic Antark. Antark is usually a liquid and only becomes solid and strong during winter, when they can lean on Sensei's companionship. It illustrates both their strength and reliability, as well as their mental fragility and their dependence on others' approval. The same will apply to the alloy that replaces Phos's arms. Now that they understand the weight of responsibility, they carry it, and the weight from the alloy takes away Phos's speed, and grounds them, making them less flighty and more reliable. Their new fighting style focusing on defense when before Phos wanted to prioritize speed and coolness. They opt for defense not just because of their fragility, but because they don't want to see anyone else taken by the Lunarians again. But that same weight removes Phos's self-assured attitude. They can't afford to be childish anymore, and from here on, Phos won't ever stop worrying about the future. Kongo says that crying was a defect of humans. The gems certainly have and show emotion, but Phos can now emote more dramatically than the rest. Their arms flail in shock and droop in fatigue and sadness. They even act like they have a mind of their own when Phos isn't in their best mind. It's a constant reminder of not just their frail constitution, but their mental instability. As I mentioned earlier, characters with physical toughness tend to have the stubbornness and mental strength to match. And Phos will only become more unstable both mentally and physically as the story goes on. And the alloy spilling down and around Phos visualizes that, especially in the more intense moments. When the cast discusses using Lapis's head to repair Phos, the conversation delves into concepts similarly touched upon by the ship of Theseus. And the core question is how much replacement or change has to occur before something loses its identity completely. The most consistent answer the manga portrays is that memory is the basis for identity. After all, no matter how much one changes physically or spiritually, memory adds continuity to our lives. And Phos loses more and more memories along with bits of their original body. In this setting where characters have an overabundance of time, characters like Yellow Diamond are so tired of life that forgetting is their coping mechanism for not dying. Memory adds continuity, but with that continuity comes a want for a resolution, a firm ending. Regardless, Phos's memories are never completely erased, at least not till the very end of the manga. But they do occasionally forget about Cinnabar, their original goal, foreshadowing how their goal will eventually become irrelevant to them as they drift further away from their original form. But remembering everything else will become more stressful with Phos's next transformation. Phos's first few changes gave them a body to keep up with the other gems, and now Lapis's head gives Phos the intelligence they lacked. And suddenly they're smart enough to betray and manipulate others, just like that sea slug from 100 years ago. We also see the amount of text in the manga increase in the middle section of the story. This is mostly the shift in tone and because of the exposition and lore dumps to come, but it's partly because of Phos's newfound focus and active brain. They can't stop thinking for even a second, and stop noticing every small detail. Their own dialogue ends up consuming more and more space on the page, especially their inner monologue. Whenever a story has a long-standing mystery about how a post-apocalyptic setting became the way that it is, it tends to add the ignorance is bliss layer of irony. Not knowing the horrible truths can make life easier to parse, but I'd argue it's more accurate to say the manga instead says simplicity is bliss. That's why all the characters want to return to nothingness, to no peace. Most characters live in some kind of paradise, whether on the moon or on Earth, but the human condition comes with worries, wants, and self-inflicted pains. Any kind of paradise made for humans would be too complicated to be perfect, and what could be more simple than being nothing at all? Phos's new accelerated mind only highlights the burden intelligence gives to humans. Phos rocks their brains trying to outthink the problems that even a whole kingdom couldn't solve over thousands of years, and their attempts only compound their helplessness. It's partly why the ideal beings that replace humans are rocks with childlike personalities. It's hard to imagine a form of life more simple in both body and mind. The next addition to Phos is the synthetic pearl eye implanted by the Lunarians. This gives Phos the last third of humanity in the physical sense, and it comes with their decision to betray the gems on Earth. It represents Phos's resolve to complete their mission and all the ill intent that inevitably comes with it, beginning as contempt for Congo but eventually morphs into murderous anger. And it's notable that in that transition, Phos loses their other original eye. The pearl eye represents tunnel vision. Phos's mission is now their only lens to see the world. Another scene worth mentioning in regards to the pearl is how it lights up when Phos prepares to ask Cinnabar to come to the moon. The first page only showing Phos from the left with only the pearl eye on display, to illustrate how Phos is only thinking opportunistically, only to cover it up when they decide to back off. Cinnabar is Phos's original goal. They represent the past mission Phos chose for themselves and the sentimentality Phos still has for the gems on Earth, making them the perfect opponent for Phos's final battle. Phos's single-mindedness is contrasted with Cairngorm, who finds a newfound freedom and self-defined purpose on the moon. They don't let the past or some grand mission dictate life for them, ironically coming to resemble the original carefree Phos more than the stoic Antarct, who both characters were compared to at one point. You can directly compare their relationship with Ghost to Phos's relationship with Antarct. Both had guilt weigh them down and press them into a shape similar to their lost friend, but only Cairngorm managed to move past it and find their own shape. It's also notable that Cairngorm never substitutes the ghost quartz that surrounded them. They simply make peace with who they are now. As the gems on Earth live in peace and forget the war, and the gems on the moon create new lives for themselves, Phos is simply festering with anger. While everyone else is changing for the better, Phos has become a stubborn machine in their own right. They're so focused on the future that the present completely eludes them. They fight and struggle and harm others for a far future that may never come, instead of finding peace with the state of things. And this is made clear when Phos assimilates Cinnabar's Mercury, the gem they coveted for sentimentality, now representing their guilt as it morphs with them. The Mercury weighs Phos down as they hobble over to Congo one last time. But it's also notable that Phos absorbs the substance that forced Cinnabar into solitude, after they insist that they don't need anyone else. Before, Phos was discontent with her solitude and wanted approval from other gems more than anything. And now Phos is embracing that solitude, forgetting the motivations that brought them here in the first place. And they'll spend the next 10,000 years alone with nothing to do besides suffer in self-reflection, slowly drowning in that poison. The smooth white head and more defined chin from the Mercury makes Phos resemble Sensei, making their transition to a machine more obvious. They then assimilate a piece of Congo himself and begin inheriting their role. Now that the pearl isn't Phos's only eye, they can see the world from a different angle, experiencing the downfall of humanity from Congo's perspective, and in the process becoming a human's idea of a perfect being, a god. Countless centuries later, Phos encounters the new lifeforms that will inherit the Earth. And not only do they find a new purpose, but find themselves learning from them. Seeing such simple creatures content to just exist blows their mind. In this new world, Phos believes the last shard of their original body, and by extension the last remnant of humanity, is the greatest danger on the planet. Phos knows better than anyone the depths humanity can sink to, through both the memories they inherited from Congo and their own misguided attempts to end the war. As they are now, Phos can only view humanity and its remnants with pity and fear. The last stretch of the manga seems to chide humanity a lot. The doctor who created Congo has a very pessimistic view of society, and we see humanity wiped off the earth and their spirits wishing to disappear into nothing. And Phos tries to make themselves disappear in an attempt to not corrupt the new life on Earth, insisting it's the correct and just thing to do. And a harsher interpretation of the story might tell you that self-improvement is a pointless exercise. It hurls insult after insult at the very idea of being human. But the entirety of the manga can never bring itself to actually hate humanity, or the idea of trying to be your best self. It just condemns Phos's desperate and reckless attempts to do so. It's reiterated one last time in the ending, as the last piece of humanity, once part of a god, a martyr, a villain, a traitor, a soldier, and a child, gets to enjoy life a bit longer, with all their past sins and burdens slowly falling away, until they too reach a state of peace and nothingness. Illustrated by the last specks of Phos slowly becoming smaller and smaller, not replacing the lost bits with more burdens, guilt, fears, and desires, but simply existing as the fragile being they are. You've gotten so much lighter, haven't you? The weight is gone, and Phos is only getting lighter. The path to nothingness inches closer and closer. All the suffering may have felt needless, and maybe some of it was, but it helped Phos reach the conclusion they needed. Nobody learns without living and making mistakes after all. If my understanding of Buddhism and the journey to Nirvana is accurate, it's a cycle of constant change in death and rebirth, much like the stages in Phos's life. But because life is suffering, one should seek enlightenment to end the cycle and find peace. To reach enlightenment, suffering is inevitable, and the goal is to shave away all excess emotions and worries to try and achieve peace and nothingness. Desires, even well-intentioned ones, can bring suffering to yourself and others. Land of the Lustrous is a story about the human burden, the way our minds, souls, and bodies weigh us down and torture us. It portrays the emotions we attack ourselves with for our imperfections: inferiority, guilt, anxiety, dysphoria, depression, anger, the imperfections of our bodies and the pain that comes with physical form. Land of the Lustrous is a story that treats humanity cruelly, but only because that tends to be how we treat ourselves merely by virtue of existing. This isn't a story that simply points out the ways in which we are foolish and evil creatures. It doesn't matter if the world is better off with or without us. We already exist in it. It's ultimately a work that preaches empathy for and explores the ways we cope with our own existence. Happiness and the ability to be content are always closer than they seem, but we constantly let it elude us. Thank you all for watching. Land of the Lustrous is a gem of a manga, and if you somehow watched this whole thing without reading it yourself, shame on you, it deserves a fresh read. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more, and I'll see ya in the next one.